Hi, you are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Now, we have had many distinguished guests in the Ladies' Room, including 2 Olympic champions and 1 United States cabinet member. But today, we are very pleased to welcome our very first United States ambassador, Nancy Brinker, who is even better known as founder of the Susan G. Komen Foundation. She is a breast cancer advocate, a breast cancer warrior, and a breast cancer survivor and thriver. She is also our first guest who has been a Presidential Medal of Freedom recipient, as well as a member of Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People in the World. So I'm a little bit fangirling today. President Obama has also fanboyed and has called her a catalyst to ease suffering in the world. Accordingly, she is currently the World Health Organization's Goodwill Ambassador for Cancer Control, as well as the founder of a new organization we're going to hear a lot more about called the Promise Fund. Now, amongst her many highlights of her career, she was appointed by President G.W. Bush as Chief of Protocol of the United States with the rank of Ambassador and Assistant Undersecretary of State. She is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Promise Me, How a Sister's Love Launched the Global Movement to End Breast Cancer, which is our In the Ladies' Room book of the week, and I highly recommend it to all who haven't yet read it. Now, it is very tempting for me to share with you many more details of her background and accomplishments, but then we wouldn't have time for a conversation. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Nancy G. Brinker into the ladies' room. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Dr. Donica, for having me.
Oh, it is such a pleasure. And I am wearing pink in your honor.
I see that. I'm just overwhelmed with this. Good for you. I'm just personally always thrilled that this awful disease, though, has a color, and it gives people a lot of hope when they see it, because they know that there have been a lot of people working on behalf of people who've been diagnosed with breast cancer.
Well, and you have really led that charge. What do you have, 75,000 volunteers in the United States, and how many chapters?
When I no longer work on a daily basis with Susan Komen because I've spent so many years doing that, and it's an organization that just, goes along and does their work. And I think now there are maybe 40 or 50 affiliates. At one time we had 140 when I was running the organization, and it was in the midst of the biggest part of the breast cancer movement. But luckily the work has become very well known. I believe as of today, Susan G. Komen, all of its volunteers and donors and supporters and survivors and thrivers have raised almost $3.2 billion and given it away over this period of time.
That's incredible. And I love the story that I've heard you tell about how you became a fundraiser when you were 5 years old. Do you want to share that story with our listeners? Because that's fabulous.
Who was my idol and my best friend. She was 8 and I was 5. And our friends in our neighborhood were all gathered in those days around the polio epidemic. And a few of our friends had it. And so she got the great idea, which she usually always had great ideas and then gave them to me to do. She said, Annie, we've got some friends who have polio. So I think we need to do a benefit show in our backyard. We'll do a song and dance show, and we'll raise the money and we'll give it to the Polio Association. So I said, oh, that's a good idea. And she said, good. You can sing and dance and you do all the entertainment and I'll sell the tickets. And I thought, even then when I was 5, I thought, I only know 2 songs. What am I going to do? And so we got up and I did it, and it was a wonderful day. And that was our first. Neighbors came in. We had a $64 check that we took to the Polio Association. And I think it was one of the happiest days of both of our lives, because we felt what it meant to try to give back to people that we wanted to help.
I love the punchline, though, that I heard you use once about how how she told you, you're going to sing a dance and I'm going to sell the tickets.
Right, exactly.
And then after the show, you thought you did pretty great. And she said, what?
Next time I'll sing and dance and you sell the tickets.
So you have been selling the tickets ever since. And as I shared with you, I am the very proud mother of an actress. So of course I love musical theater stories. And I bought this dress when my daughter was Elle Woods in Legally Blonde, but I get a lot of use out of it every October.
Well, I can see where she gets her talent. So that's great.
Or at least the blonde hair. Anyway, so tell us how you started the Susan G. Komen Foundation.
Well, it was a sad beginning. Susie developed breast cancer when she was very young, when she was 33 in 1978. And I was 3 years younger, of course. I was living in Dallas, Texas, working at my first big job. She was living in Peoria, Illinois, which was our hometown. And it just was very, very difficult to even suggest the idea that she come somewhere else. And by that time, we'd had 6 or 8 breast cancer centers in the United States. Not much. Couldn't use the word breast, radio, TV, or film. And certainly no one wanted to talk about it. They called it the big C. And even people thought it was contagious. Very, very sad time. And she was of a different generation with me, just enough older to be part of the silent generation. And they just, it was about how you looked, not how you felt. Mm-hmm. Finally, we got her to care after she had her first incident with breast cancer and was diagnosed. And I just knew she wasn't going to do well because we had a great aunt who we had seen who had breast cancer, and we had been visiting her in New York, and we saw her without her clothes on one day, and Susie just went into almost
almost a what? Oh, we lost you for a second.
Almost
there we go.
Trance of sadness. She couldn't deal with it. I, on the other hand, thought of it was like a glass half full. Here was this beautiful aunt we had who'd had this very traumatic, in those days, they did a Halsted radical, which was
right.
Very, very lucky.
Which is, for people who don't know, that's a radical mastectomy where they take not only the whole breast, but also the muscle tissue.
And the lymph nodes and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And my aunt was so attractive and fun, and it's like it didn't happen to her. She was very upbeat. But I knew then that Susie had a fear of this disease or any cancer. And then when she was diagnosed, I just knew it wasn't going to go well. We were lucky enough to get her to a cancer center, but it was too late. And she had 18 months of a very, very difficult, every therapy they had then, which was, they kind of carpet bombed you with 2 or 3 protocols, which was all we had at the time, because we didn't have a lot of knowledge of cancer then. That was 8 years after the war on cancer had been declared by President Nixon. There was a great deal of money in the society at the time, in our society, but very little real biologic knowledge of cancer. So hence, people were treated with the same thing. It was deadly. It was hard. It was so hard. There weren't any of these wonderful drugs that could keep you from getting violently ill. She was violently ill a lot of the time. And 18 months later, we lost her. But not at the end. She looked at me one day and took my hand. And she would never say when I die. She knew she was dying, but she would always say when I get better, which was code for when I die. And she said, when I get better, Nan, I want you to help me cure this disease. I don't think anybody's mother should have it. I don't think anybody's sister should have it. I don't think anybody should have this disease. And I promised I would. When you love someone that much, and I knew she was going, and I didn't want to admit it to myself. Nobody did, but we knew it. It was not going to be long. I committed to do this, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. And didn't even really think about it until after her death. And we were grappling with, how are we going to get along? We were a very close, small family. How are we going to get along without Susie? And it was devastating for us. But finally, about 6 months later, I said to myself, I made this promise. I promised her I would do it. I have no idea what I'm going to do, but I started studying about it then. asking a lot of questions, looking around, figuring out what to do. And by 1981, I was living in Texas. We started the Susan G. Komen Breast Cancer Foundation, and for the advancement of treatment, screening, treatment, and hoping that survival. And we were a band of about 15 women in my living room. We vowed to do this. All the people who knew we were doing this and doing an event thought that we would just be, just a tea party, that we girls were going to do. And all the physicians that we tried to work with said, "Oh, you're not going to want to do this. This is awfully hard work for you girls."
Don't you love it?
I'll never forget, Donica, at the time, I said to myself, we may look like just you girls, but we are all dedicated. And we started out and we never stopped.
So 1981 is when I applied to medical school.
Oh,
and
my
I was being told that this was very difficult for a girl.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look at you.
But it was very difficult for everybody.
Right. And you knew then how difficult cancer was. I'm sure you heard this.
My first job ever was, my first professional job was when I was in college for summers. I worked as a research assistant at Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital in New York. And one of the patients who was there at the time was my high school math teacher, who was a very large woman. And when I saw her in the hospital, she was down to about 96 pounds. And she was the first person I knew with breast cancer. And that was very traumatizing to me, but also very mobilizing and motivating.
I'm sure it was. Well, how wonderful for you, because at that time, there weren't very many women in medical schools, not nearly like it is today, or people focusing on that. So you must have seen an awful lot that you learned a lot from. Good.
I learned a lot. And when I think about the patients that I've talked to or worked with over the years, also my first research project ever in medical school was working with a breast cancer surgeon who was trying to improve the arm mobility for women who had complications of mastectomy afterwards, and that was at Roswell Park Cancer Center in Buffalo, New York. But I always think back to a woman patient I had who was 54 years old, who was a farmer, and she had never missed a day of work, including when she gave birth to each of her 5 children. And she came in and she said to me, "I just don't feel well." And all of my colleagues made fun of me for giving her the complete workup, because I said, if a woman who comes in at 54 years old, who never took a day off from work, is saying, "I just don't feel well," something serious is wrong.
Right.
And of course, she had metastatic breast cancer, which is a story for too many people, because they're diagnosed, and of course, then we did not have the Susan G. Komen Foundation raising awareness about the importance of preventive screening and breast self-exam and mammograms, et cetera. But, we still have, now over 250,000 women diagnosed with breast cancer per year.
Amazing, it is. And unfortunately, the numbers don't change enough. We've done a tremendous amount. I'm very proud of the scientists who've been funded. But at the end of the day, we have not made the progress we need to. We have, you see all the numbers, and they say that we've reduced the death rate from breast cancer 40% from 1989 to 2014. All that may be true, but I worry about the other end of that equation, which is, if you look at our population, people with disparities are growing a great deal faster than people with medical care.
And tell us exactly what you mean by people with disparities.
So when Susie and I were sitting in the waiting room at MD Anderson all those years ago, I'll never forget.
And MD Anderson, of course, is a premier cancer center in Texas.
And at the time, it was one of the only cancer centers with a breast cancer center. Mm-hmm. And we were sitting there. There was a big, I'll never forget it. I don't know why these images, a big clock on the wall, and we'd sit there.
I'm losing you. There you go. We're back.
So there was a big clock on the wall, and we would sit and look at that clock, because it would take sometimes 3, 4, 5 hours for her to see a physician. That's how overwhelmed they were. But then we would look down the halls and there would be people sitting on the floor from every culture, from every kind of background you could imagine, mostly poor, who were waiting for care. And Susie was really disturbed by that. And she looked at me one day and she says, where you live and where you're from shouldn't make a difference about whether you live. And I thought about that, and she was right. And they say today that now if you look at people's zip codes, that's what determines how long you will live. And I understand.
And that's actually backed up by actual data and actual research. She had noticed this just from an observation, but there's tons of data showing that that's true.
Exactly. There was so much of that, and now it's growing more and more simply because even our population shift is changing. We know how many births are happening sort of in the United States. And we know that people with low resources to live on, with who are in poverty, 20% below poverty, 10%, whatever, call it whatever you will, they rarely have the kind of medical care or the ability to reach to a physician or have the access to care. So what happens? They die sooner. Not also to not to disregard that people of color, women of color, often develop breast cancer more because genetically there is a predisposition, often BRCA positive, often other new genes that were discovered, gene mutations were discovered. So
and those disparities, the racial disparities, are independent of income and independent of economic disparities. Economic disparities, of course, further compound the situation.
So the curve is going like survival, and I see it going like that. Because why? Because their populations are growing very, very fast. People with disparities, sometimes they come in, they have big families, they or have relatives living with them, any number of issues. And working women, very successful women, are having fewer children. So oftentimes what happens is, again, we get back to the zip code thing. And the disparities are growing so fast because medical care is unreachable for many people. So why I'm doing the present job I'm doing is because I live in Florida. We are supposedly, according to the Women's Philanthropic Alliance, which studies trends and philanthropy, et cetera, we are now 49 out of 50 states in the benefits we return to non-elderly women, meaning women under 65, of all genders, of all.
Wow, that's staggering.
Staggering. That's what I thought when I saw it.
And Florida, of course, is the third largest state in terms of population.
Exactly. And growing every year in population by a city the size of Orlando. For 1,000 people a day coming into the state. We have a fragmented system funded by property taxes. Okay, but it's more than that. We have a lot of for-profit hospitals, particularly in central, in the county I live in, Palm Beach County. Well, it sounds like it's, well, yes, people are very wealthy who are lucky enough to live on the island of Palm Beach. But when you get into West Palm Beach and you go over the bridge and you look at the rural part in the Everglades and where we live, it's unspeakable to me that so many people have no care at all. And because of that, we are losing them often to breast and cervical cancer that should have been cured very early with early detection. And that's why we founded the Promise Fund. We wanted to build a model, not another national charity, but how we can get people in to be screened and then how we can get them treated.
So a community-based model, which I think is really important with what you're doing. And I heard you once say that, you've already started a national movement and now it's time to focus on your own backyard. And I think all of us need to do that. Yeah. So you're trying to create a model that every community in the United States can presumably contact you or go to your website, or are you making a manual for people to have like a turnkey operation to do this in their own communities?
Yes, because what we're doing is, first of all, we wanted to address a model that's appropriate for the infrastructure of our state, which is small in some places. But also we wanted something that works. we didn't want to grow a national charity. What we wanted to was to get away from all the overhead that national charities have, which is enormous. Now, some of it, of course, you need because there's service agencies, but that's not the case with most national charities today. I wanted an organization where the people who work with us actually rendered the service, and or we would grant other organizations for the services we need. So one of our goals was to begin to bring on very, very well-trained community-based navigators who were
I love the term navigators. Explain to us what you mean by a navigator.
A navigator is generally concerned to be a healthcare worker, could be a social worker, could be a social psychologist, could be a nurse, but someone who wants to work at guiding patients to the care and the reimbursement there is, or using their assets that they do have and the assets we can find in the community to bring the treatment to bear. It's a difficult role, but people who are good at it, and we train them or we get them trained, are wonderful. And they go out into the community and they do public information sessions based on the community habits. So let's say in one part of our community, women are from, say, a Hispanic kind of a background, although it's difficult to break that down into what is and isn't Hispanic per se. Let's just say a South American profile. We know what their habits are in their community, where they do their celebrations, where they do their grocery shopping, where they do their communication. And then we try to tailor outreach and events to educate them about screening, about early diagnosis, get them into some diagnostic or other screening program if we can. And then, but we're very, very excited about the navigators we do have. Our lead navigator, and we have about 7 of them working now here in our county. Fascinating story. About 12 years ago, she developed breast cancer. She had a lovely apartment, a great job, and a car, and she was living very happily in this county. She then develops breast cancer. No care. She didn't qualify. Her insurance plan did not qualify for her to go get the care she needed. So
I'm losing you again. We have an
Mhm.
unstable internet. You're back.
Yeah. She had to sell her car, give up her job and her apartment, and move into a warehouse.
Oh my God.
5 months to be treated because she had to qualify to be 20% below the poverty line, so she could have care. From this lesson, and she's fine now, she's wonderful. But from this lesson, she walked the walk. She's been through the journey. And she's an incredible navigator because she understands exactly what happens to people and what needs to happen. So we're very fortunate that part of our program is working really, really well.
So I think it's fabulous that you have these navigators on the one hand. This is revolutionary.
Yeah,
on the other hand, I'm sick to my stomach that we need people who are navigators because our healthcare delivery system is so complicated and so complex. There was a fabulous article written by a woman journalist. She was a filmmaker, and she was making a film in Finland. And she was in her mid-30s. I forgot her name, but she found a breast lump. And she didn't know how to get care in Finland. So somebody said to her, just go to the cancer center. And it was like a clinic where there was a cancer center. And she went there and she expected she was going to have to make an appointment and, be seen at some later point. And the administrator there, this receptionist, said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. There's about a 30-minute wait. Do you mind just waiting?" And she thought this was the wait to fill out the paperwork, but it was the wait to see a physician. And the physician literally walked her to the mammogram machine across the hall. They did the mammogram. They found a lump. They apologized that they didn't have any appointments for a biopsy that day, but she had her biopsy the next day. She wound up, it turns out it wasn't malignant. And the whole cost of this entire process was about the equivalent of about $46. And they apologized because she was not a citizen of Finland. So that's why there was the $46 charge.
It's a very difficult problem. We're very politically divided in the United States, and this state is no exception in terms of people's views about what the state, what the county, what the city, what the town, what the government should return. I realized in starting this, Danica, that I couldn't fix everything that's wrong because we have so many immediate needs. We had to work with the system we have. So what we have done, which I'm very excited about, is one really good system we have in the United States are called the federally qualified healthcare centers, or community healthcare centers by our federal government. Every president since Bill Clinton has supported them, has made sure we've had a budget for them. People can walk in and get primary care.
And I have worked at some of those centers.
Yeah, so you know, but you know too well that in those centers, that doesn't mean you're going to get anything beyond primary care. So what we've done, we have a couple of really good centers here in South Florida in Palm Beach County, and we went to one that we know very well called Found Care. And we gave them a grant, and then a friend of ours, Hologic, which is a large manufacturer of mammography equipment, et cetera, donated a 3D machine to the clinic, and we are funding the Promise Fund.
Okay, so 3D, by 3D, you mean a 3D mammogram machine, and this is state-of-the-art mammography.
To the federally qualified center.
That's awesome.
And they're they're building now a screening center. Now then, we see ourselves as wrapping the philanthropy around the center that they need. And of course, there's also some of the certifications we're going to have to expand because federally qualified centers are built on being primary care. Well, too bad. We're going to have to do that. But now what we're working on, which is a little bit of a tougher fight, is we've got to find about 30 to 40 hospital beds that can be permanently, we know we can count on in one of the hospitals in the county. And that's particularly hard because most of our hospitals are for-profit centers. Right. So that's very frustrating to me, very irritating. And to your point, the exact opposite of what you saw in Finland, the exact opposite.
Right. So, and the good news is that when breast cancer is detected early, it is an outpatient procedure. It's an outpatient process.
Stage 1 or 2, if you're lucky enough to be, no one's lucky to be diagnosed with this, but if you are lucky enough to be diagnosed with that, this is not a major trauma. You can usually about a 98% cure rate if it's detected early with a stereotactic biopsy, some kind of minimal procedure. You may need some chemo, you may need some radiation, but we know people survive. Over 15,000 women have died in Florida over the last 4 years, the best we can say, because we believe of late-stage diagnosis.
Well, and we also know that still in the United States, over 40,000 women die per year from breast cancer.
Exactly. It just is unacceptable.
Which, just to put that in perspective, is the same number that die from gunshot wounds.
That's exact. Isn't that unbelievable? That too. But what I'm most excited about is I love a good fight when it comes to, and when it comes to what I know is the right thing to do. And people are saying to me, you're not going to get this done because we've had such an argument in Florida over healthcare and the way we fund it and this, that, the other thing. I can't believe that in this day and age, I refuse to believe that people will not feel exactly as I do. This is a social justice issue. It's
absolutely.
Not that we don't have the money. It's not that we don't have the facilities. And it's not that a few people may have to change their business model, but we all have to survive in our community. We are one community. These are our neighbors.
Absolutely. And I challenge anyone to dare you to back down from a fight. So I think this is wonderful. And I think what's really wonderful of with what you're doing is you're saying, this is where I live. These are my neighbors. These are the people in my community. And I can't change the whole system, but I can make a difference here. And what I challenge everyone who's listening to do is figure out, how do you contribute? How do you make a difference where you live? Now, I know that you, of course, your name will forever be linked with breast cancer advocacy and breast cancer awareness. Tell us why you added cervical cancer to the Promise Fund.
Another irritating problem that I came up with, because I'm over 70 now, and somehow somebody in the government decided that that's an age where most services should be stopped, screening, et cetera, et cetera. In the meantime, doing that has put a lot of women at risk because many women come to Florida to retire.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm losing you again. I'm losing you. So in the meantime, until I get you back, I'm going to tell people about cervical cancer. So,
okay,
here you are. Great.
all right. So what's happened is that a lot of people are at risk for this disease. It is, again, as you say, this is one of those diseases that's 100% curable. I saw it and witnessed it in sub-Saharan Africa. A small cervical lesion can be removed like that. Oftentimes, it results from a viral issue. Oftentimes, women.
And the virus is HPV, which is human papilloma virus.
And we need women to have, well, they're older at that point, but younger women and children to have the vaccinations that they need. And we need people to understand that there is a risk in older women and they should have screening if they want it after the age of 70, if they're sexually active, whatever it is, they're still living lives and working.
Well, and if it's not even if you're currently sexually active, it's if you ever had sex one time with one person.
Right. That's right.
Because you can contract it decades before it has any effect. And so it doesn't mean, for married women, I want to make sure you know, it doesn't mean somebody was sleeping around with somebody.
Right.
It means that you had sex with somebody one time and contracted this virus at some point.
And it should be, these are kind of things. But then I thought to myself, again, it was in the box of unnecessary deaths, things that we can avoid. Then we also don't have tort reform in Florida, so that if you allow, let's just say a patient contracts a disease like this, isn't treated, someone's going to get sued, and they're sued all the time. We have more ambulance chasers in this state than ambulances.
Oh gosh.
I really don't like that practice. I think it can be avoided. Certainly there are fouls we have to call on physicians or people, caregivers who don't do the right thing. But you know what? Not hundreds of millions of dollars and wasted. And so I'm so happy we've done this. And also I think women who are more aware of their bodies do better generally in every area.
Absolutely.
That's why we included it. And we'd like, as you say, to build a model that, you know, even in my dreams, I think about building a model that could be used for early Alzheimer patients. If you're aware of a disease and you make a plan early, yes, it's incurable right now, but there are strategies to get people to live longer with a disease like that, Parkinson's, these chronic diseases that if we approach them in a community fashion where we care about what happens to people. And you know what else? I can't imagine. I wish I had a grandchild. I don't. I have a wonderful son, but he hasn't graced me with one. But I would hate to see as many grandchildren are living in this island, in this county, be sitting in a car behind their grandparents having come for a visit and seeing people dying on the side of the street. I mean, it chills me. It's just not the right way. These are our neighbors, as you say, and we're responsible for where we live.
So the other point, you know, you mentioned people with Alzheimer's, people with Parkinson's, people with other chronic diseases. There are millions of women who are living beyond breast cancer.
Right.
And those women will go on to get other chronic diseases.
Right.
Any chronic disease you have is better treated if everything else is better treated. So if you don't have cervical cancer, your Parkinson's disease is going to be a lot easier to manage. If you don't have breast cancer, your Alzheimer's is going to be a lot more easy to manage. I actually once did a consult on a patient who was in the psych ward in our hospital. And I was a gynecology resident at the time. I'll never forget this woman. And the psychiatrist called me to do just a physical exam because they weren't comfortable with it. And they said the woman was saying that she was crazy and she was in the psych ward because she was saying she had green aliens coming out of her breast. And no one had done a physical exam. And when I removed her gown, her breast was so macerated from breast cancer, from advanced breast cancer, that there was a green substance coming out of her nipple. And to me, that was a really good way to describe it. So she did not have Alzheimer's and she was not crazy. She had metastatic breast cancer, which was now in the news, of course, last week that Shannon Doherty has announced that she has stage 4 metastatic breast cancer. And people are shocked and devastated and mourning, for her in advance because she's quote unquote so young.
Yeah,
but
right.
she is 48 years old, which is looking younger and younger to me every day.
I know. Isn't that the truth? Yeah.
But the average woman diagnosed with, or the median woman diagnosed, the median age is 65, but most women are 54 to 65. How old were you when you were diagnosed with breast
I
cancer?
was 37.
Wow, so very young.
But I'm BRCA positive, as I'm sure my sister was, but didn't find out till years later when they had BRCA, when it was,
So BRCA, of course, is one of the genes that we know of and we can screen for breast cancer.
Right.
We actually did an episode on this podcast with somebody who calls herself a previvor because she was diagnosed before getting breast cancer and was able to take preventive measures.
That's great. That's good to hear. Although I'm more in the fact that we have to remove body parts and do to preserve ourselves and from this, prevent this disease from happening. But hopefully within time we can figure out some way to really do great gene therapy that doesn't break the bank and somehow prevents these things from happening. But you bring up one point that I want to mention. Even if you are a previvor, let's say that, I had a lot of chemotherapy when I had my disease because they were afraid they didn't know, but they suspected it was biologically like my sister's, and somehow we had there was a familiar connection there. But the disease was the treatment was so harsh. I only had 4 or 5 heavy courses of chemo because they thought the dosage was higher. If a little was good, a lot was better. Mm-hmm. This too has effects on their after effects. And I've developed one of those about 10 years ago, which was a real hit to my immune system. And I have to take some therapy every month just to make sure that my immune system acts as well as it can. But this is what happens. And then oftentimes people will develop lymphoma or leukemias or other kinds of diseases, as you say, because of it. So we're always on the watch and concerned. But hopefully now we have better, more focused, more targeted therapies that will keep people from, developing really metastatic disease very fast.
So getting back to the fact that you were diagnosed with breast cancer so young and your sister was even younger, how was she diagnosed? Because obviously she was too young to be having mammograms.
Right. She started lumps. And
I'm losing you again. She started
having breast lumps. And she was, they were cysts. They were diagnosed as cysts, which different.
More than 60% of women have.
Right. So they would either put a needle in it and drain it, or they would, and I can't remember if she had a biopsy before she had one. I don't think so. Anyway, she called me one night. She said, "Nanny, I've got another one of these lumps, and this time it feels different." And I can't tell you how, I just knew. I knew it. I just could tell from the tone of her voice, you know your own body. And at least she wasn't afraid to do breast self-exam. So I said, well, I'll come home this weekend. And I got off the plane and I saw my father's face and I knew exactly what it was. It was not so early breast cancer. And she was treated by a surgeon who had been trained at Memorial, but it was before, again, anyone understood the real biology of the disease. And they did a mastectomy followed by a subcutaneous, mastectomy followed by an implant. Mm-hmm. And it was the wrong thing to do. Who knew,
right.
So it progressed very quickly, and it wasn't too long, a few months later, that it had gone to her lung and she was stage 4 very quickly.
I'm so sorry. And then your cancer was diagnosed. Did you find a lump or were you having mammograms at that point?
I was under heavy surveillance, mostly my own choosing, but I started having benign lesions, which I had maybe 3 biopsies. Mm-hmm. Oh, and they hated doing that because it did create more scar tissue. And with the limited mammography we had, it was real hard to see anything. But then one time I too had a lump. I knew it felt different. It was hard. It didn't move. I just knew. And 6 weeks later, they wanted to not remove it. And I don't know, it was 6 weeks, 2 months later, it was bigger. So I went down to MD Anderson. As I was living in Dallas at the time, I said, I want this out. I don't care what risk I take. I want this out of my breast. Something is growing. And sure enough, it was. So that started, fortunately, I felt a little bad because I'd started by then Susan Komen, and my only fear was that I wasn't going to live to see us fulfill my sister's dream and her wish. And it was a new organization then, and I just really wanted to be here to make sure we actually got our work done.
And you certainly have gotten a lot of work done, but there's certainly a lot more work to be done. And I give you a tremendous amount of credit for everything that you have done on behalf of everybody's children and grandchildren. So I think that's extraordinary. And I really want to thank you for that. Before I let you go, I have to ask you, as chief protocol officer for the White House for a couple of years, and as an ambassador, and then as a goodwill ambassador, you have probably been to more countries than most of us can name. So I know you have lots of wonderful stories, but what story jumps out at you the most about the most unique, memorable, interesting, or different thing that you ever experienced in a ladies' room?
Oh, that's easy. Actually, of all places, in the Chicago airport. And I was returning from an overseas trip. I think I was coming from Washington, and I was going to go home and see my family for a day. Anyway, my pants, I had a short jacket on, so it didn't cover what it should have. I had zipper on a pair of pants. All of a sudden, the zipper stuck, and I couldn't get it off. And I had to go to the bathroom. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I, sucked it in, pulled real hard, and the rest of the whole side of the leg tore open.
And you didn't care because you just had to go.
What I had to do was get out of the restaurant and get to the restroom and get to the baggage. I didn't have anyone with me. I didn't have anything to cover myself up with. Nothing. So I took my pull bag, and there was a woman next to me, and she says, "I've got a safety pin. Let me get a safety pin." So she did, and I held up the rest of it. You can imagine what it looked like stumbling down the airport, holding my pants up with now one leg's up to the knee, and I'm terrified the other side's going to do the same thing.
Oh no.
That lady, she was so nice to do that for me.
The kindness of strangers, absolutely. So I will tell you, one of my travel tips is I always travel wearing a black raincoat that goes down to my knees. And every single time, no matter what, it's the same one. And the reason is because I once had a wardrobe problem that involved a white pair of pants. And I will leave the rest to your imagination. Anyway, what?
Nothing is quite as traumatic at the moment.
That's happened to every woman once. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. Where can people learn more about the Promise Fund?
It's if you go into the promisefundoflorida.org.
Okay, the promisefundoflorida.org.
And we're on the website, and you can get all of our information. We keep adding more of it every day. It looks a little, I won't say early, because I'm very proud of the people who did it. It's just we're adding new things every day.
Well, you just started this in 2018.
Yeah. You know me. I like it. I mean, a lot to do, and I'm not going to probably most likely won't live another 40 years to see our work get done.
I wouldn't put it past you.
I want to see a whole lot more done in a short amount of time. And we have the tools. We have to have the will to do it.
Well, if I was a betting person, I would be betting that you will see the results of your work in 4 years, let alone not 40 years. I give you every credit for doing this. Thank you so much for doing everything you can do to help. And thank you so much for joining us in the ladies' room.
Thank you, and thank you for all that pink. I needed that. I love what you.
I was going to ask you, actually, now you reminded me, I was going to ask you what percentage of your wardrobe is pink?
One whole rod in my closet has some form of pink woven in or is pink, and more than any girl should have.
But probably not more than any 5-year-old girl has.
Exactly.
Anyway, thanks again.
Thank you. You're wonderful. I enjoyed it so much.
Be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.